Hey, what's going on everyone? Axel here. Today I'm doing a retrospective on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and this is a system that means a lot to me because it was the first system that I grew up on. If you don't include DOS, it's really the first console I had. I thought that a video like this might stir up some nostalgia, not just in myself, but in anyone else listening, so I hope you all enjoy. So I'm going to talk first about the console, about my experiences with it, and then I'm going to go into some of my favorite games. So here's the console, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. This is actually the one I had when I was a kid. It's the very first one I ever had, and still the only one I have. Unfortunately, not too long ago, this thing finally, after decades of use, just stopped working, and I haven't gotten around to replacing it. But I think the console, when it came out, was a really big deal because the graphics were such an improvement over the NES, which unfortunately for me I wasn't able to experience because it was just a little bit before my time. But it was finally a console that fixed the top loading problem. Finally we had a console that, unlike the original NES, actually was a top loader and didn't rely on this little VCR thing that they wanted to do with the NES, which was a problem because the 72-pin connectors would go out over time and people would have problems with their cartridges. But this fixed that. All growing up, like, I never had issues with this thing getting it to read games, and this thing took a beating, and I can't believe it lasted as long as it did. I spilled so many sodas on this thing, stepped on it, kicked it, dropped it when I was a kid. I can't believe this thing still holds up. Believe me, if I was a kid and I had one of the more modern day consoles instead of this, if I was a kid nowadays, I would go through so many consoles. But these old consoles really do, they really do stand apart, because if you open up one of these things, essentially all they are is a motherboard. You know, a motherboard with a connection slot. Essentially, they're really simple, so there's not a lot to break. Let's talk about the controller next. The controller was, in my opinion, just perfect for the time. Of course, there were huge improvements in the future after this, but for the time this was actually really revolutionary, and I remember this being really comfortable as a kid. And now as an adult, it's not as comfortable, just because a controller this size was this was still a time when video games were mostly just for kids, so the controllers were smaller to fit a kid's hand, and they definitely feel a little small today having adult sized hands. But I remember for the time they were super comfortable, and they're still not bad today, and it was a solid improvement over the original NES controller, which, as you can tell, just is not near as ergonomic. It's just a box. But essentially these are the same things. It's just this is curved, and they added top buttons. They added two more buttons to the middle here, but it's essentially the same design. It's essentially the same concept. It's a D-pad focused controller. And you kind of saw the evolution of this with the dog bone controller. This is the second version of the NES controller, which you can see they slowly morphed into the Super Nintendo controller. They kind of got the message early on that this box shape is not the most comfortable, although I actually personally don't mind it, but a lot of people complain about how these edges kind of dug into your hands. But I think the controller was really great for the time, and even today, like I said, it's a little small for my hands now, but I don't really have much of an issue with it. I find that there's other controllers today that are less comfortable than this, even going back today. Now I want to go through and talk about some of my favorite games, which is really the core of this video. The first one that meant a lot to me is Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World, which, if you're getting a Super Nintendo and you want to get into collecting today, this is the game to get for the system. In my opinion, this is the single best cartridge ever made for the system. It's essentially a port of some of the NES titles. Like, it has some original NES Mario titles, has Mario 1, Mario 2, Mario 3 on it, which are originally NES games, but they're ports and they're cleaned up. So like Mario 3 looks a lot better on this than it had, and it also includes this includes Super Mario Lost Levels, and which was essentially was supposed to be Mario 2, but Nintendo Japan apparently felt it was too difficult for the North American market, so they didn't release it. At least that's the story I've heard. Don't quote me on that if it's not true. That's just what I've heard. And this obviously doesn't also include Super Mario World, which is fantastic follow-up to Super Mario 3. So this is just like perfect platforming, and most of my honestly most of my childhood was spent just playing this one game, and it was fine because as a kid this lasted me a long time, because when you're 6, 7 years old, you aren't really good enough to beat a lot of these games. I never beat Super Mario 1 as a kid. I never beat Super Mario 2 as a kid, or 3. I know 3 I played a lot, and I think I got to the last world and I couldn't beat it, and I still have never beaten 3 today. Super Mario World I did beat as a kid, because I think Super Mario World's a little bit easier, especially with the Star Road workaround. You can really beat this game really quick, but this is one of the games that's just meant a lot to me, and I think that if you are going to get a Super Nintendo, this is, like, I can't recommend these games enough. Of course, there are countless ways to play these games today through emulators and virtual console, and tons of game collection packs that have been released for other Nintendo systems. I think the Nintendo Wii had one, but just great games. Great games. And I don't think there's anything like playing this on the original hardware with the original NES controller. The next game that meant a lot to me, and I think one of the like hidden gems of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, is Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars, which is a fantastic RPG. It's kind of a beginner's RPG. It's your standard turn-based combat system, but it's a little bit easier. It's definitely marketed towards kids. Obviously, it's a Mario Nintendo game. Most of them are, but it's a game that has a really good storyline, actually, and it's one of the games that shocked me as a kid, because you actually have Bowser. Bowser joins your team, which blew my mind at the time. Like, what is this? Like, every Mario game I've had growing up has been Mario trying to kill Bowser or stop him from stealing Princess Peach, but in this one you actually have Bowser fighting with you, which is pretty crazy. But the combat system actually works really well. It's mostly a traditional turn-based, but there are kind of some live action elements to it. There's a little bit of platforming within the game, and when you're actually in the combat, you have to actually time. It's like an RPG, except you actually have to time attacks. So there's a little, it's not just as boring as cycling through menus in combat. You actually have to pay attention and actually like hit the attack button right when you attack to get bonus damage, stuff like that. But there's all kinds of things to this. There's a bunch of characters that are actually really nostalgic today, like Geno. Geno is one that was actually really popular. A lot of fans were rallying for him to get into the recent Smash Brothers game. But there's characters like Mallow and Geno in this that really are still loved today, and I have no idea why they've never made a follow-up to this. I guess they got into Paper Mario or something, but this is a fantastic franchise, which is too bad that this is ignored, because I've beaten this game like 3 or 4 times, and even today it's marvelous. The graphics were outstanding for the time, like mind-blowingly good graphics for the time. They still look really good today. This is one game that definitely has aged very well. The next game I want to talk about is Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Fantastic game, fantastic fighting game, one that meant a ton to me growing up. I just remember playing this for hours and hours with my brother, and just such good times. This is just kind of a perfect fighting system, and it's so good they're actually re-releasing it, a Street Fighter 2 version for the Switch this year. It's just one of the best fighting games, and it's really what puts Street Fighter on the map, and why it's such a popular esport these days, and still is such a popular franchise. Another fighting game that meant a lot to me, not the best game, but Mortal Kombat 3 I really liked. It was really this was, from what I remember, kind of panned compared to the first two, because some of the characters introduced some elements like stages that you can move in within stages. For example, like if you uppercutted someone, you would shoot through the roof. But I think people didn't like a lot of the characters, were kind of frowned upon. Like Stryker was seen as kind of a cheesy character. I don't think people like characters like Shiva. I know reading back today there are some balance issues with it, but for whatever reason people just didn't like this one that much. But I remember renting this from Blockbuster all the time and really enjoying it, even though it's obviously not as good of a game as Street Fighter 2. The next one and really the last one that means a lot to me as a kid, and one that I played is almost as much of as I did Super Mario World, Super Mario All Star, Super Mario World is Super Mario Kart. This game is fantastic. I played all the Super Mario Karts except for Double Dash. I've played all the other ones. I played a ton of Super Mario 64. Played a ton of Mario Kart 8 for the Wii U. I played a ton of this one, and this one is my favorite. This was before a time where Nintendo got so casual about their Mario Kart franchise. And the reason I like this more than Mario Kart 8 today, the newest version of Mario Kart, and they're even releasing Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for this Nintendo Switch that's coming out in a few months. But the reason I like this one better is it's more of a pure racer. The problem with Mario Kart 8, my biggest complaint is all the luck. There's so much luck to it. A lot of the items are really powerful, like the bullet bill in Mario Kart 8. I hate that one. The infamous blue shell. This was before all that stuff. In this game, it was all about skill. It was a lot more of the race. The winner of the race depended upon your skill versus the luck factor, because the items were good in this game, but they weren't overpowered. The only items they had in this game were the star, the thunderbolt, the red shell, the green shell, the feather, and the mushroom. I believe that's all of them. So there was none of this cheesy blue shell crap that you're in last place, you shoot a blue shell, it just automatically goes to the person in first place and knocks them back. There's no bullet bill like you see in Mario Kart 8, where you just basically hit the button, get the item, hit the button, and you shoot to first place, like without even having to drive your character. You actually had to use a lot of skill, and even stuff like the red shells that homed onto your enemies, you actually, you still had to have some sort of skill to use those. So I really like this. I think the character selection and diversity is pretty good. You've got your all-around Super Mario Brother characters. You've got your heavy characters like Bowser and Donkey Kong that have really bad acceleration, but the best top speed, so they reward, I guess, players who don't make as much mistakes. And then you have your characters like Yoshi that have really good acceleration but not the best top speed. And I think other characters like, Toad was that way too in this game. So really good character diversity. I really like the track, really good soundtrack. Just probably my favorite probably my favorite Nintendo racing game of all time, I'd have to say. The next game I want to talk about is Yoshi's Island, which was a very different game when it came out. And I believe this is the introduction of the Baby Mario character. You play as Yoshi, and the whole object of this game is to return Baby Mario, I believe, to his parents. At the beginning of the game, Yoshi finds Baby Mario, and then he has to go through this quest to this land to return him, I believe, to his parents. And it's just it was a platformer, but it was a different kind of platformer, because as you could eat enemies as Yoshi and then get projectiles through the use of eggs. And you actually it wasn't the traditional platformer in terms of you die if you get hit twice or whatever. It was more, you had a timer that would go up to like 20 seconds. And if you got hit or touched, Baby Mario would fly off Yoshi and the timer would start counting down. And if it got to 0 before you could go touch Baby Mario, you would die. But just really good level design, a lot of really good boss enemies, a lot of really unique worlds in this one that I really enjoyed. And I played through this a couple times. I haven't played through it in probably 5-10 years, but I'm considering doing it again because it's really one of the best platformers on the Super Nintendo for sure. One of my next and the last game is one of my favorite Nintendo franchises, and probably it's a franchise that I didn't like as much when I was a kid, because I think it was a little bit too hard for me, but today it's my favorite, definitely my favorite franchise, and that's Donkey Kong Country, the Donkey Kong Country franchise. And I never played 2 and 3 just because I didn't have them when I was a kid, but this one I did play. I actually didn't own this cartridge. I believe this was a friend of mine's cartridge. I played it a lot played it with him, but I actually never owned this game as a kid, as far as I can remember. But I know today, this is a franchise. What makes this different from, let me grab that other card I was looking for, from these type of platformers, is this has always been a more difficult set of games. Games like Super Mario 1, 2, 3 were certainly hard, but especially going to where these franchises are today. The Donkey Kong games have now been a lot harder than the recent Mario games, and even back in the day, Donkey Kong Country was definitely harder than Super Mario World. So as a kid, this was insanely difficult for me, but today I really enjoyed it, and I did end up, well, I actually never ended up beating this. I'm actually on I've been playing through it recently. I'm actually on the very last boss, and I never actually have managed to beat King K. Rool yet, but I did beat the Wii U Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, the newest iteration of it, and I really, really enjoyed these platformers. One of the best things that these things bring, aside from just an increased difficulty that markets them more towards a more mature audience than a kid audience, is the music. The music, I can't tell you how great the music is, not just in this entry, but every Donkey Kong Country entry I've played. The music is absolutely fantastic. The graphics are great. I can't recommend this game enough if you are getting into the SNES. So guys, those are my favorite games. That's really the experience I've had with the Super Nintendo. I guess I can get into now that I've talked about the games, I can get into now like where I went from here, and how, if I still play the Super Nintendo today. And the answer to that is mostly no. It was initially because my Super Nintendo broke, but partially because I've just kind of grown past it at this point. A lot of these games are great, but the best games on the Super Nintendo I've just played to death. I had the Super Nintendo probably up until middle school sometime, when my parents finally ended up getting me a PS1. I never did own an N64 as a kid. So and then from the PS1, I got into the PS2 later, and that was my primary console when I was in high school and college. And then eventually, as I got to the back end of college and out of college, I got into stuff like the Wii U and the Xbox One recently. So Super Nintendo means a lot to me because it really was my childhood as far as video games go. And I have a lot of good memories with these games, and I don't play through them much anymore, but they're always there. If I ever want to go back and play through them, I will. So guys, that's it for this video. That's the Super Nintendo. That's what it meant to me. So please comment below and let me know if you grew up with the Super Nintendo, what it means to you, if you like any of the games that I've showed, what you think of those games, etc., etc. I'd really like reading your comments. And as always, please subscribe, hit that like button if you did enjoy the video, so you can see my content in the future. That's all for today. You all have a good one. Take care.